Welcome to Reality Stories Hub. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. I used to believe that love was the only thing that mattered. That if two people truly loved each other, nothing else could stand in their way. Not distance, not time, not even the whole world telling them they were wrong. I believed that with my whole heart. And maybe that's why I didn't see the storm coming until I was already standing in the middle of it. My name doesn't matter much to this story. What matters is that I was an ordinary girl living an ordinary life in the beautiful city of Barcelona. I worked as a teacher at a small community school, helping children learn to read and write. My apartment was tiny, my car was old, and my wardrobe was simple. But I was happy. I had my students, my books, and my dreams. And honestly, I never thought I needed anything more than that. Then I met him at a hospital fundraiser. I almost didn't go that day. My friend had convinced me to volunteer at the registration table, checking in guests and handing out programs. I remember feeling out of place among all those fancy people in their expensive clothes and jewelry. But I told myself I was there for a good cause, so I smiled and did my job. That's when he walked in. Tall, with kind eyes and a smile that didn't feel rehearsed like so many others I'd seen that evening. He was the son of a family that owned one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in all of Europe. The kind of family you read about in business magazines. The kind of wealth that seemed almost impossible to imagine. But when he approached my table, he didn't act like someone who grew up with everything handed to him. He asked about the fundraiser, about the children we were helping. He asked about me. And when I mentioned we needed help moving some donated medical supplies, he rolled up his sleeves right there and spent the next 3 hours helping us carry boxes, laughing with volunteers, and listening more than he talked. I remember thinking, this man is different. He didn't need to be there. He didn't need to help. But he chose to. And something about that choice made my heart pay attention. After that night, he kept finding reasons to see me. Coffee dates that turned into long conversations. Walks through Park Güell, where we talked about everything and nothing. He told me about the pressure of living up to his family's expectations. And I told him about my dreams of opening a school for underprivileged children someday. He never once made me feel small for my simple life. Instead, he said I made him feel grounded, like he could finally breathe. 6 months later, under the stars on a beach in Sitges, he asked me to marry him. I said yes before I could even think about what it would mean. Because in that moment, all I could see was the man I loved, the man who saw me for who I really was. I didn't think about his world or mine. I just thought about us. But love, as I would learn, doesn't exist in a bubble. And the moment I stepped into his family's world, I realized that to them, I wasn't just marrying their son. I was threatening everything they had built, everything they believed their family should be. The first time I met his parents was at their estate just outside Barcelona. The house looked like something from a movie, all white marble and glass windows that seemed to touch the sky. I wore my best dress, practiced my smile in the mirror, and told myself to just be myself. But the moment I walked through those doors, I felt it. The coldness. The judgment. His mother greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked at me the way someone might look at a stain on an expensive coat, something that shouldn't be there. His father barely looked up from his wine glass. And his younger brother asked me what I did for fun, in that tone that wasn't really a question, but a test to see if I would say the right thing. I sat at their dinner table, my hands folded in my lap, trying to make conversation. Every word I spoke felt like it was being weighed and measured. When I mentioned my work as a teacher, his mother said, "Oh, how sweet," in a voice that made it sound like anything but. When I talked about my family, his father changed the subject. My fiancé held my hand under the table and whispered, "Don't worry, they just need time to get to know you." I nodded and smiled, but inside, something had shifted. I realized then that this wasn't just about two people falling in love. This was about two completely different worlds colliding, and I was standing right at the fault line. That night, after he dropped me home, I sat in my little apartment and cried. Not because I didn't love him. I loved him more than ever. But because I suddenly understood that love alone might not be enough to bridge the gap between who I was and who they expected me to be. Still, I made a choice that night. I chose to keep fighting. I chose to believe that eventually, they would see what he saw in me. That given enough time, love would win. I had no idea how wrong I was about the time part. And I had no idea just how hard they would fight to push me away. The engagement party was supposed to be a celebration. That's what engagements are for, right? Joy, excitement. Two families coming together to celebrate love. But from the moment the invitation arrived, I knew this party would be nothing like that. It would be a test, and I was being set up to fail. The party was held at their estate, the same place where I'd first met his family. This time, though, it wasn't just his parents and brother. This time, there would be over 200 guests. Business partners, society friends, people whose names I'd only seen in newspapers. I spent weeks trying to prepare myself, choosing the right dress, practicing what I would say, telling myself I could handle this. But you can't really prepare for the feeling of walking into a room where everyone has already decided you don't belong. When we arrived, the stares began immediately. Not the kind of stares that say, "Oh, what a beautiful couple." No, these were the kind that say, "What is she doing here?" I could feel their eyes scanning me from head to toe, judging every detail. My dress, my shoes, my hair, my skin. Especially my skin. I heard the whispers too. People weren't even trying to hide them. "Is that her? I heard she's a teacher. What does she know about our world? This won't last 6 months." Each whisper felt like a tiny cut, small enough that you could ignore one, but 1,000 of them together, they bled. His mother found me early in the evening, her smile as cold as ever. "Try not to look so nervous, darling," she said, loud enough for others to hear. "Everyone is watching." It wasn't advice. It was a warning. And it worked. I became even more aware of every move I made, every word I spoke. The worst part was dinner. The seating arrangement told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in their eyes. I was placed between two women who spent the entire meal talking over me about yacht parties and fashion weeks in Paris. They never once asked me a question or included me in the conversation. It was as if I wasn't even there. Across from me sat his brother, who kept smiling at me in this knowing way, like he was enjoying watching me squirm. At one point, he leaned forward and said, "You must find all of this so overwhelming. I mean, it's all so different from what you're used to, isn't it?" I wanted to tell him that kindness and respect aren't about money. That I'd met people who had nothing but gave everything, while people like him had everything but gave nothing. But I didn't. I just smiled and said, "It's definitely different." Because I knew that anything else I said would just prove their point, that I didn't fit in. My fiancé tried to stay close to me, but his father kept pulling him away to introduce him to investors and important people. Every time he left my side, the circle around me grew colder. And I realized something painful. He could protect me when he was next to me, but he couldn't change how his world saw me. That was a battle I would have to fight alone. Later in the evening, I excused myself and stepped outside onto the terrace. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time all evening, I could breathe. I looked back through the windows at all those people laughing and drinking, and I felt so completely alone. Like I was watching a movie of a life I would never truly be part of. That's when his mother found me. She stood beside me, looking out at the garden, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said very quietly, "You seem like a nice girl, and I can see that you care for my son. But caring isn't enough. This life requires more than love. It requires understanding, breeding, the right connections. Things that can't be taught or bought." I turned to look at her, and I saw it in her eyes. She wasn't being cruel for the sake of it. She genuinely believed what she was saying. To her, I wasn't just the wrong choice. I was an impossible choice. "I understand that you think I'm not good enough," I said softly. "But your son doesn't see it that way. And maybe that's what really bothers you. Not that I'm not good enough for your family, but that he thinks I'm good enough for him." Her face hardened. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Maybe not," I replied. "But I know what love looks like. And it doesn't look like this." I walked back inside, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. I found my fiancé and told him I wasn't feeling well, that I needed to go home. He looked worried, guilty even, but he didn't argue. He drove me home in silence, and when we got to my apartment, he said, "They'll come around. I promise." But I didn't believe him anymore. And I think deep down, he didn't believe it either. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and I cried. Not because of what they said or how they treated me. I cried because I realized that marrying him meant marrying into a family that would spend the rest of my life trying to prove I wasn't worthy. And I didn't know if I was strong enough to live like that. But I also knew I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Because sometimes, the things worth having are the things you have to fight the hardest for. Even when the fight feels impossible. 3 weeks before the wedding, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was his mother, her voice smooth and polite, asking if I could come to the house for a private family meeting. Just to discuss some final details before the big day, she said. Something in her tone made my stomach drop, but I agreed to come. What choice did I have? When I arrived at the estate, the air felt different. Heavier. The butler led me to a room I hadn't been in before, a large office with dark wood paneling and leather chairs. It looked more like a courtroom than a family room. And in a way, I suppose that's exactly what it was. His parents were already seated, along with his brother and a man I'd never met before. He was introduced as the family's attorney. That's when I knew. This wasn't about wedding details. This was an ambush. My fiancé wasn't there yet, and I realized that was intentional. They wanted to talk to me alone first, to deliver their message without him there to defend me. Please sit down, his father said, gesturing to a chair across from them. I sat, my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. I wouldn't let them see me shake. His mother began, her voice calm and measured. We want to talk to you about what marriage into this family really means. Our family has a reputation, a legacy that has been built over 3 generations. The pharmaceutical business is not just about money. It's about trust, image, and maintaining certain standards. I listened, my face expressionless, waiting for the punch I knew was coming. His father leaned forward. We know you care for our son, but love, as romantic as it is, isn't always practical. And frankly, we have concerns about how this marriage will affect our families standing in the business community and in society. There it was, not hidden behind politeness anymore. Just the raw, ugly truth of what they really thought. The attorney slid a document across the table toward me. We'd like you to consider this agreement, he said. It's a confidentiality and separation contract. If you sign it, you'll receive 10 million euros. In exchange, you agree to end the engagement quietly and never speak publicly about this family or your relationship with our son. For a long moment, I just stared at the paper. 10 million euros. More money than I could make in 10 lifetimes as a teacher. Enough to open 100 schools, to change thousands of lives, to never worry about money again. But it wasn't about the money. It was about what the money represented. They were trying to buy me out of their son's life. They were telling me that I was a problem that could be solved with a check. I felt something rise inside me then. Not anger, exactly. Something bigger than that. A kind of clarity I'd never felt before. So this is what you think of me, I said quietly. That I'm with your son for money. That I can be bought off like some kind of inconvenient mistake. His mother's expression didn't change. We think you're a sensible woman who understands that sometimes the practical choice is the right choice. This money could change your life. You're right, I said, picking up the document. This money could change my life, but not in the way you think. And then I tore the contract in half, right down the middle. The sound of ripping paper echoed in that quiet room like thunder. His brother laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. You really think that makes you noble? You're just being stubborn. I stood up, gathering my purse. No, I'm being honest. Something you clearly don't value. You want to know what I think? I think you're scared. You're scared that your son has found something real, something that money can't buy or control. And that terrifies you because it means you might not have power over him anymore. His father's face turned red. You have no idea what you're walking away from. Without our blessing, this marriage will be a disaster. We won't support it. We won't attend. And we will make it very clear to everyone we know that you are not welcome in this family. Then I guess, I said, my voice steady despite the tears burning in my eyes, you'll have to live with that choice. Because I'm not going anywhere. I walked to the door, and just as I reached it, it swung open. My fiancé stood there, his face pale, his eyes moving from me to his family and back again. What's going on? He demanded. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw the boy who still wanted his parents' approval, even as he tried to become his own man. And I realized something heartbreaking. He would have to choose. Not between me and them, but between the life they wanted for him and the life he wanted for himself. Your family, I said softly, just offered me 10 million euros to leave you. His face went white. He turned to his parents, his voice shaking. Tell me she's lying. Please, tell me you didn't do that. The silence that followed was answer enough. I need some air, I whispered, and I walked out of that house, down those perfect stone steps, past those manicured gardens, and I kept walking until I couldn't see the estate anymore. I sat on a bench in a nearby park, and I let myself cry. Not because I was giving up, but because I realized what lay ahead. This wedding would happen, but it wouldn't be the fairy tale I'd imagined. It would be a war, and I would be fighting it mostly alone. My phone buzzed with messages from him, apologizing, begging me to come back, promising to fix everything. But some things I was learning couldn't be fixed with promises. Some things required action, and I needed to see what action he would take when the moment came. Because in 3 weeks, I would walk down an aisle toward him, and his family would be watching, waiting for me to fail, waiting for him to realize his mistake. What they didn't know was that I had been underestimated my entire life. And every single time, I had proven the doubters wrong. This would be no different. The morning of my wedding, I woke up in my small apartment feeling nothing like a bride should feel. There was no joy, no nervous excitement, no giddy anticipation. Instead, there was just a heavy weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I sat by the window in my wedding dress, watching the sunrise over Barcelona, and I wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. The dress was beautiful, simple but elegant, exactly what I'd always dreamed of. But the dream had turned into something else entirely. Something I barely recognized. My bridesmaids, my closest friends from the school where I taught, tried their best to lift my spirits. They helped me with my hair, told me I looked beautiful, reminded me that today was about love. But I could see the worry in their eyes. They'd seen the news articles, read the online comments calling me a gold digger, an outsider, someone who didn't belong. They wanted to protect me, but they didn't know how. Neither did I. When we arrived at the estate where the ceremony would be held, the tension was immediate. The venue was stunning, of course, with flowers everywhere and chairs set up in perfect rows. But the faces of the guests told a different story. They weren't here to celebrate. They were here to watch a spectacle, to see how this impossible situation would play out. His family stood together near the entrance, greeting guests with practiced smiles. His mother wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my yearly salary. His father shook hands with business associates, his face unreadable. His brother smirked when he saw me, as if to say, "Let's see how this goes." None of them acknowledged me. Not a smile, not a nod, nothing. It was as if I was invisible. Or worse, as if they were pretending I didn't exist. And my family. My heart sank further. They hadn't arrived yet. My mother, my father, my younger sister, none of them were there. I checked my phone desperately, but there were no messages, no calls. Just silence. I felt panic rising in my throat. Had something happened to them? Or had they decided not to come, too embarrassed or intimidated by all of this? The thought made me feel more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The wedding coordinator approached me, her voice gentle but urgent. "We need to start soon. Are you ready?" Was I ready? I didn't know. But I nodded anyway, because what else could I do? The music began. That familiar wedding march that's supposed to make everyone smile and cry happy tears. But as I stood at the entrance to the aisle, looking down that long walkway lined with judgmental faces, I felt my confidence crumble. I started walking. Each step felt like I was walking through water, heavy and slow. The whispers started immediately. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I could feel them, like needles pricking my skin. People weren't even trying to hide it anymore. They stared openly, some with pity, some with disdain, some with curiosity, as if I was some kind of exhibition. Halfway down the aisle, I glanced to the side and caught his mother's eye. She wasn't looking at me with anger or hatred. She was looking at her son, standing at the altar, and her expression was almost pleading, like she was silently begging him to stop this, to come to his senses before it was too late. That look broke something inside me. I felt tears burn the corners of my eyes, and I had to force myself to keep walking, to keep my chin up, to not let them see me fall apart. I was almost at the altar when I heard it. A sound from outside, distant at first but growing louder. A deep rumbling, like thunder, but it wasn't thunder. It was engines. Powerful engines. The music faltered. Heads turned. The officiant paused, unsure what to do. Through the large glass doors at the entrance, I could see vehicles approaching. Not just one or two, but a convoy. Black SUVs with tinted windows, flanked by security motorcycles with their lights flashing. The entire venue fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The vehicles came to a stop right in front of the entrance. Guards stepped out first, moving with precision and purpose. And then, from the center vehicle, a man emerged. My breath caught in my throat. I recognized him immediately, even though I hadn't seen him in over a year. My father. But this wasn't the father I remembered from phone calls and old photographs. This was someone different. He wore a formal black suit with a diplomatic sash across his chest, medals pinned to his jacket. The emblem on the vehicles, the way the security moved around him, it all suddenly made sense. My father wasn't just any diplomat. He was the ambassador, one of Spain's most senior diplomatic officials. He'd been stationed in Geneva for the past 2 years, working on international health policy negotiations. I knew he was important, but I'd never really understood just how important. He'd always been just my dad, the man who called me every Sunday and asked about my students. But now, watching him walk toward the venue with quiet authority, I saw him the way everyone else did. As someone who commanded respect not through money, but through integrity and influence. The crowd parted as he walked through. Cameras flashed. Guests whispered his name, recognizing him from news reports and international summits. His mother's face had gone pale. His father stood frozen, his earlier confidence evaporating. My father walked straight down the aisle, his eyes locked on mine. When he reached me, he took both my hands in his and kissed my forehead. The gesture was so simple, so full of love, that the tears I'd been holding back finally fell. "I'm sorry I'm late, mi hija," he said softly, loud enough that the people nearby could hear. Traffic from the airport was terrible, but I wouldn't miss this for the world. Then he turned to face the crowd, his voice calm but carrying easily through the stunned silence. "I believe there was some question about whether my daughter belonged here today. Let me be very clear. She was raised to walk with dignity, not to beg for it. And anyone who cannot see her worth is the one lacking vision, not her." The silence that followed was deafening. My father then turned to my fiancé's parents, extending his hand in greeting. "Ambassador Rodriguez," he said simply, "I look forward to welcoming your son into our family." His father shook my father's hand, his grip uncertain, his face a mixture of shock and embarrassment. His mother looked like she'd been slapped. All around us, I could see the guests' expressions changing, recalculating, realizing they'd made a terrible mistake. My father took his seat in the front row, nodding to the officiant. "Please continue." And just like that, everything had shifted. The power dynamic, the assumptions, the judgment, all of it turned on its head in a matter of moments. As the ceremony resumed, I looked at my fiancé, and I saw tears in his eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of understanding. He squeezed my hand and whispered, "I'm so sorry." For all of it, I squeezed back. Because in that moment, I understood something important. This wasn't about winning or losing, about proving myself or getting revenge. This was about standing tall when the world tried to make you small. About knowing your worth even when others couldn't see it. And as I said my vows, my voice steady and clear, I wasn't just making promises to the man I loved. I was making a promise to myself. That I would never again let anyone make me feel less than I was. That I would walk through life with the same quiet dignity my father had just shown me. The storm hadn't just passed. It had transformed into something else entirely. Into a moment of truth that would echo long after this day was over. The reception that followed the ceremony was unlike anything I could have imagined. The same people who had whispered about me, who had looked down on me, who had treated me like I was invisible, now couldn't wait to introduce themselves. To shake my hand. To tell me how beautiful the ceremony was, how happy they were for us. It was almost funny in a sad way. How quickly respect can be earned not through who you are, but through who you're connected to. My father's presence had changed everything, and I wished it hadn't had to come to that. I wished they could have seen my worth without needing his title to validate it. But that's not how the world works, I suppose. My father spent the evening graciously speaking with various guests. Business leaders who wanted to discuss partnerships between their pharmaceutical company and international health initiatives. Society figures who suddenly remembered they'd always believed in love crossing boundaries. Politicians who saw an opportunity for connections. He handled it all with the same calm dignity he'd shown at the altar, never boasting, never making anyone feel smaller than him, even though he easily could have. That was who my father was. A man who understood that true power doesn't announce itself loudly. It simply exists quietly and undeniably. At one point during the reception, my new mother-in-law approached me. Her expression was complicated, a mixture of embarrassment and something that might have been the beginning of respect. "Your father is quite remarkable," she said carefully. "We had no idea about his position, his influence." I looked at her, and I could have been bitter. I could have thrown her words back at her, reminded her of everything she'd said and done. But what would that have accomplished? Instead, I said simply, "He's always been remarkable. You just had to be willing to see it." She nodded slowly, and I saw something shift in her eyes. Not a complete transformation, people don't change that easily, but maybe the first crack in the wall she'd built around her judgment. My husband, I could call him that now, found me later on the terrace, away from the crowd. He looked exhausted, but also lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. "I should have fought harder for you," he said. "I should have made them see you the way I see you, long before today." I took his hand. "You loved me when it was hard to do so, when your whole family was against it. That takes courage too. But you shouldn't have had to go through all of that alone," he insisted. "The comments, the judgment, that contract they tried to make you sign. I should have protected you better." "Maybe," I agreed. "But maybe I also needed to learn how to stand up for myself. To prove to myself, not to them, that I belonged here because I chose to be here, not because anyone gave me permission." We stood there together, looking out at the Barcelona skyline as the sun began to set, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. And I realized something. This wedding, this whole difficult journey, hadn't been about whether his family would accept me. It had been about whether I would accept myself, whether I would let their doubt become my doubt, whether I would let their limitations define my possibilities. My father found us before he left that evening. He had to return to Geneva the next morning for an important meeting. He hugged me tightly and said, "I'm proud of you, Mihija. Not because of today, but because you never lost yourself in all of this. That's the real victory." I almost did, I admitted. There were moments when I thought about taking that money and walking away, when I wondered if it would be easier to just give up. "But you didn't," he said, "because you know something they're still learning. That dignity isn't something that can be given or taken away by others. It's something you carry within yourself, regardless of what anyone else thinks." After he left, I rejoined the reception, and I noticed something different about how I felt. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I wasn't worried about whether people approved of me. I simply was who I was, and that was enough. In the weeks and months that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. My relationship with my husband's family improved slowly. Not because they suddenly loved me, but because they learned to respect me. His mother began asking my opinion on charity initiatives. His father included me in family business discussions. His brother stopped making snide comments, and actually started treating me like family. But the biggest change was in me. I went back to teaching, but I also started working on my dream of opening a school for underprivileged children. My husband supported it fully, and surprisingly, so did his family. They even donated funding to help get it started. Maybe they saw it as good publicity, or maybe, just maybe, they were beginning to understand that giving back was more important than keeping up appearances. I learned something valuable through all of this. That love is important, it's crucial, but it's not the only thing that matters. You also need respect. You need to respect yourself enough to stand up for your worth. And you need to demand respect from others, not through anger or bitterness, but through the simple act of refusing to accept anything less. The story could have ended differently. I could have signed that contract and walked away with millions. I could have broken down under the pressure and called off the wedding. I could have let their judgment convince me that I wasn't enough. But I didn't. And that choice, that decision to stay true to myself, changed everything. Not just for me, but for everyone who witnessed it. Because when you stand with dignity in the face of contempt, when you hold your head high when others try to make you bow, you send a message. You tell the world that worth isn't determined by money or status or family name. It's determined by character, by integrity, by how you treat others and how you allow yourself to be treated. Sometimes I think about that young woman who walked into that mansion months ago, nervous and hoping for acceptance. And I barely recognize her. Not because she's so different now, but because she finally learned to see herself clearly. To see her own worth without needing anyone else's validation. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Never let anyone make you feel like you need to shrink yourself to fit into their world. Don't beg for acceptance from people who can't see your value. And don't ever let someone else's limited vision of you become your vision of yourself. You belong wherever you choose to stand. You are enough, exactly as you are. And anyone who can't see that, well, that's their loss, not yours. Walk with grace. Stand with dignity. And remember that the quietest victories are often the most powerful ones. The ones where you don't fight to prove you belong, but simply live in a way that makes it impossible for others to deny your worth. That's what my father showed me on my wedding day. And that's what I hope to show my children someday. That true strength isn't loud. It doesn't demand or threaten or boast. It simply exists steady and unshakable, like a mountain that doesn't need to explain why it stands tall. And in the end, that strength, that dignity, that quiet knowledge of your own worth, that's what changes hearts. Not immediately, not easily, but surely, certainly, inevitably. Because grace, real grace, always wins. Always.